Welcome to Why Knowledge Matters. In this episode, Father Joachim Ostermann joins me to discuss living and dying, life and death. Welcome, Father Joachim. It's great to have you back on the show.
It's nice to be back, and I'm happy to talk about this topic, even though you might think that talking about life and death is a little bit too serious, but I think it's very important to consider it.
How do you see living and dying, or life and death?
So, you can look at life and death, or birth and death, as beginning and end. And maybe we tend to think in those ways, and then life is simply what's in between and is simply given, and there's a beginning and there's an end, and that's all there is to it. But that kind of escapes what really needs to be considered. It's escapist, because it doesn't really consider death. Living and dying is really what needs to be considered. What does it mean to be truly alive? And what does it mean to be dying? And if you have accompanied a person who is dying, who is preparing for death, then I think you realize a lot about what it means to be living, because it is really, of course, a person who is dying is still alive, and very much so. And you may learn a great deal from observing what happens to this person and how this person considers his or her life as they reflect on death. But simply living blindly, simply taking life for granted as being between birth and death, that really, it escapes the responsibility for thinking about what does it mean to be a living being? What is it really, what my life is about? How can I shape this life in such a way that I truly am living, that when I face my own death, that I will be probably disappointed that it's ending, probably in deep pain, but I will also think that I really had something in my possession that was precious and wonderful. And I should show that already right now, when I'm not thinking of death, when I'm thinking of simply living and looking at a beautiful day and looking forward to the things that I'm about to do today. So living and dying, there's a complementarity between them. And life and death is more than beginning and end.
Why do we struggle so much in today's world when it comes to death and especially dying?
I think it's the question of responsibility, and the question of responsibility, not just to others, we have that, but we also have a responsibility to ourselves. And I think that maybe a real challenge today is to really take this responsibility for oneself fully seriously, and to truly believe that my responsibility for myself is important. And not just in the sense of my happiness, my well-being, being able to do as I please, but my responsibility of leading my life in such a way that the person who I am meant to be truly comes alive, truly becomes present in the world for the benefit of others. Our life is always meant to be shared. But if I truly understand my responsibility for myself as a responsibility that will benefit others, then I truly take responsibility for my life. But I can't take out the part of taking responsibility for my life. So if we live in awareness of death, then we realize our life is finite, it is a gift, it is given to us, and we have a responsibility to the origin of this gift, to God in my tradition, to the Creator. But to truly acknowledge the reality of death, let's take responsibility for our lives. But responsibility assumes we are responsible to someone. The responsibility has somebody to whom I'm answerable. And I can't be answerable to myself. That's circular. So to truly take responsibility for one's life also requires acknowledging that I have to give an account of my life. And that really is the spiritual dimension of really understanding death as more than simply the end of my life. It means acknowledging responsibility. And that, I think, today is a bit of a challenge, maybe more so than in past ages, because we have lost the art of truly reflecting on our spiritual, religious heritage.
Does it also have to do anything with the fact that it is finite life, therefore we also appreciate possibly more the moments and cherish the things in life that we are ought to cherish? So in other
Possibly.
words, you think it also is a lot of psychology, behind it, when we just look at simply in a pragmatic way at life, that we actually really truly indulge in it and know, by knowing that we at some point we will die, that we can embrace it also accordingly.
Yeah, but that has the danger of becoming hedonistic. So in that sense, there's a danger of saying, I want to have as much joy as possible, as much fun as possible, because it's finite. So let's at least maximize what I get out of it. And that doesn't quite work. So some lives are short, some lives are long, some lives are very difficult. Most people's lives are much harder than my life, if you look at the global context. So the hedonistic attempt to maximize one's own pleasure in the face of death, that lacks a full understanding of the responsibility of life. So the advantage of thinking of life and death is it's absolute. It's not more or less. It is kind of one or the other. And truly living in awareness of death, I see that as asking more than a quantitative maximization of the parameter called pleasure. It is simply having a life that is good. And I can't quantify goodness. And having a life that I truly believe when it's full, that it's beautiful, that it is proper, and that to the creator of my life, it looks like the real thing. So that's not, it's, I mean, it's good to seek joy in life. In that sense, of course, seeking out joyful, meaningful moments in life is important. That's not wrong. But the important thing is lead life in such a way that the whole product in the face of death is beautiful. To yourself, to God, to your friends, to your family, that sense of a comprehensive view of life. And if we look at just pleasurable moments, then we lose sight of the big picture. And living in awareness of death means remember the big picture, not just the moments, but the big picture painted by those moments.
Why do we struggle so much with the fact and the knowledge of death?
Well, we live in a secular age. We live in a secular age in which religion that used to accompany every moment of every person's day in the Western world is no longer part of it. We live in a world that is very much formed by the scientific culture, by measuring, by quantifying, by adding up things to the most effect. And I think that lets us lose sight of the importance of life as a complete big picture that we have to paint in such a way that is the most beautiful. So completing the masterwork of our lives is something that gets all too easily forgotten. And I think for young adults in particular, the challenge may well be that really you no longer have the well-defined trajectories of life that the generation of my parents and grandparents had so many generations ago, where it was pretty clear that you would grow up, you would get married, you'd have a family, you'd live on a farm, or maybe do work in an office or in a factory, and you would die. And your life would be very much pretty much the same by and large, like your parents, your grandparents, and your children and grandchildren. This continuity of life over generations has been lost. And the modern age is fundamentally different from all other ages in the sense of life as a whole not being presented to you in young adulthood as a clear set of expectations. So we live more fragmented lives. We live lives with many more career changes. And this is good. I mean, I changed my career several times and I quite enjoyed it and it kept me alive. But so there's nothing wrong with that. I'm very happy with the opportunities of the modern age, but it makes it more challenging. And you have to be more aware that all these differences that you introduce in your life, like career changes and such, or finding a partner, getting married, starting a family, all the decisions you make there, you're not responsible for them yourself. You can't just say, I'm doing what everybody else does. You can't just go with the flow any longer. You have to take more responsibility in the modern age. And that is a good thing. We become more alive, more complete, more beautiful by taking more responsibility for our lives and having more opportunities to paint the most beautiful picture. But it's also more difficult. So that's, I think, the challenge today. And we like to avoid death because it simply means we don't have to look back at our own lives. We can keep going from decision to decision without seeing there's a big picture we are painting, and we better paint it well because this is our chance, our one chance to do it right.
Can and should we live in the awareness of death?
Yes, that's an old religious tradition. And the statue here from one of my Franciscan brothers is a friar contemplating death by looking at the skull of a dead person. And the contemplation of death is simply a reminder that we are meant to find God in our lives. And of course, not everybody will be able to embrace the Christian faith that is clearly the faith that I have come to believe in. We know that people struggle with faith, and we all do that. And even people of deep religious conviction will at times doubt their faith and fear that their life is meaningless. That can't be avoided. Doubts are a fact of life. But the reality of death pulls you out of simple doubting. The reality of death is also the reality of your own life. The moment we think about death, you realize you're not just an animal, because animals don't think about death. Animals think about survival out of instinct, but they do not know that one day they will no longer be. A human person knows that one day he will no longer be alive. And bringing this thought to attention also draws attention to the special dignity of human personhood, of human being. And there's a lot of hope to be found in it. So thinking about death and living in awareness of death is not morbid. It's not anti-life. It is the opposite. It really means recognizing life for what it is. And in moments of despair, when I feel even wanting no longer to be alive, I realize in contemplating that how precious life is. So it actually turns around. So yeah, it makes life better, and it makes it easier to make good decisions in life when you know that one day you will no longer be alive and you will no longer be making decisions about how to live.
That's really interesting. And we also know from scientific studies that people who have faith, in one way or another, have a much easier time to actually let go and also die and go through the process of dying.
Yes.
Now, I just want to quickly touch on something what you said, and you said like it's about also the meaning, which is really important, and it really reminds me of a personal experience I had when my last grandmother basically died, and given the fact that she was dying, and given the fact that I could actually mourn by crying basically for almost hours over her, when she was lying dead, basically in bed. It was not just obviously the most painful experience in my life. But to this day, it was also the most important experience in my life. And this happened not very long time ago, but it really showed me what really life all is about. And especially the process going through the fact that someone is no longer anymore, and to acknowledge it, how painful it is, but at the same time also how rewarding it becomes, and life becomes from this moment since then actually even more profound and meaningful. So I think it's very important. I really I can understand, I can feel like
And,
what you
and
mean.
that's a gift you received. And it's a gift you received from your grandmother in that moment. And we have to acknowledge that. And an experience like that is really beautiful to behold. And dying like this also is a value, as painful as it is. So it gives meaning to suffering in a way that really one can only appreciate if one has experienced it. And this is part of our modern age's difficulty of accepting that suffering can have meaning, because we wish this person to die peacefully. If we love a person who is suffering and dying, we do want this person to die peacefully without pain. But when we experience it with her, then we realize there's something in it that saves us from the meaninglessness of despair. And that is a gift.
How do you prepare for dying and death?
I think most importantly, by reflecting on your own thoughts of what is a good life, what are values, where they're coming from, to really have a good understanding as to what is precious in life, not just enjoyable. We start with enjoyment, with good feelings, but what is it in them that makes it good? We learn from other people. If we have the gift of experiencing a person dying well, by well I mean dying in a way that really brings the meaning of death to full awareness as drawing attention to life, then to accept these experiences, to open ourselves up to the possibility of pain in suffering with that person and experiencing the salvation through that suffering. So just being somewhat open to that is a good way to prepare. But if this is just too heavy, because for some people this is just too much pain, just reflect a bit on philosophy, on spirituality. Why is it that some people believe? What is it that they believe? And if you have Christian faith, if you truly are a Christian, if you have been formed in the Christian tradition, then by all means, do not take it for granted. Do not say, well, I learned that in graduate school, I learned that in grade school. No, take faith seriously. Realize what you learned in First Communion class is not enough. If as an adult, you have to study a bit, learn a bit, engage your faith. Go to church, meet other Christians, form a community of faith, join a church community, go to Mass, receive the sacraments. Take your faith seriously, whatever it is. Don't just say, okay, I'll deal with that later. Take it seriously because it really helps you in your daily life and making good decisions. So it's really preparing for death is preparing for life. And you have to do that by taking your spiritual life very seriously. So think about your faith, practice your faith, go to church, listen to homilies, think about it. Go to another church if you don't like the one that you have been going to. But take it seriously. Make good decisions about your spiritual life. If you can't find faith, read philosophy. Think about what is life's meaning about. But don't avoid the question, because the question will always be there at the very end, and the most important. So you have learned to really contemplate what is the value of your life. The better you'll be in living it well and dying well.
how did your studies as a scientist inform yourself about life and death, or dying and death? And did it help you in one way or another?
Yes, it did help me. Of course, when I was studying sciences and when I worked as a scientist, my spiritual life, my life of faith was pretty much separate. And I did not study with any of the thoughts in mind that I'm asking now. That came much later. But what helps is to see that scientific understanding of the human body allows me to see a certain naturalness of death, that the body is meant to grow old and decay eventually, that the body has the weaknesses that prepare us for illness, that there's something natural about illness and dying in the sense of being part of our biological nature and not to be feared, not to be ignored, and not to be seen as just forces of evil that have to be avoided at all cost. There's something very real about our aging, our illnesses, and being a scientist does allow me to look at these things with a certain objective detachment and understand them and not being too distracted by them. And that also means that I can clearly separate what I mean by speaking of death as separation from God, being lost for all eternity, being dropped into non-being at all, on the one hand, and death as a biological process. So when I speak of dying, I really don't just mean the end of metabolism or something like that. What I mean by dying in the strongest sense possible is separation from God, and the sense that my life ends as if, and then I am as if I had never been. This kind of death, where the life ends in the sense as if never having been existed at all. When you exist in the memories of other people for a little while, 1, 2, or 3 generations at most, but then eventually you're forgotten. And even if you enter history as a great person who has lived, your picture in history is not the real person who lived. So if you cannot have a heritage in the human society itself for all eternity. So if you think of dying as not entering into the hands of God, then dying means being as if you had never been, which means your life is meaningless. So as a scientist, I could separate these two things. My biological body understood by the sciences, and in that sense, death is natural, not to be feared. But then I asked myself, what else could death be? And what else could life be? And when I realized it's really about closeness to God, separation from God, I realized that life understood as a scientist, it's one thing, but life understood as an adopted child of God, like we believe in the Christian tradition, that's entirely different. Because now my life becomes very much more meaningful. And what I learn as a scientist about human life can be applied in meaningful ways. That's much nicer. If you'd only do science in order to know stuff, that's boring. But if you can use science to really make life meaningful, that's very beautiful.
You said that life cannot be reduced to simply atoms. Atoms cannot tell us what life is. In other words, life can only be experienced by living it. And you remind me on an analytic philosopher from the US, and he once said that we can figure out the way a bat works, the brain functioning and all the quantitative data we can collect and figure it out. However, we can never, ever know what it is like to be a bat. What does this tell us when you think about death?
I think most importantly, to avoid any kind of reductionist approach to life. So when you think of yourself as atoms, then you think of yourself in the way of the reductionist scientist, where everything is reduced to something smaller. where you start with the big picture, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until you have elementary particles. And then, of course, it eventually disappears from mathematics. That's reductionism. And reductionism is very useful when you are a scientist, when you do physics, but very bad when you do life. Because when you do life and you simply ask, how can I use my time most effectively to have the biggest amount of fun in life, then you really destroy it. Then you end up with something which is utterly meaningless, because it becomes a disjointed list of pleasurable experiences possibly, but it's not really life. Life is inherently something which is united, developing, emerging, coming into being with others, with God. So really, when I talk about reductionism, what I really mean is not just it's incomplete, but it really takes the fun out of life and the beauty out of life and the fullness out of life. Life is a comprehensive big picture, and any thought of physicalist reductionism destroys that big picture. So that's what I meant. Kind of, if you think of yourself as atoms, then the consequence is that you don't pay attention to life. And living life, because life is given to you, so you can't define it. You receive it, and you know what it's about by living it, by knowing what is good about it. And then you discover the love of those who raised you. You discover the love of your friends, of your partner in life, of God, of spirituality. So then you discover that life is something much more precious, much larger, that emerges within all these atoms, but has an origin quite distinct from what we just consider in the natural sciences.
You are otherwise in closing about life and death, living and dying.
Well, I think in closing, to kind of sum it up, pay attention to your spiritual life. That's really the starting point. And pay attention to your faith. So if you're a Catholic Christian, like myself, do not take any of that for granted. Do not believe that simply continuing what you learned in elementary school will be enough. Take your faith seriously, reflect on it, live it. Live it by participate in your faith community. Go to church, even if it's only to meet other people, even if it's only for the social context, but realize church is about something very important. Even if you don't get it at first, just open yourself up to the possibility that you discover something. If you do not like your local church, if you're raised as a Catholic and you cannot stand for some reason what we are preaching from the pulpits, find something else. But do not give up on your own life of faith. I'm very confident that people will be drawn into the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith because I truly believe in it. I have no fears of the competition, quite the opposite. We all work together for the goodness of God being poured into the world. So, but do not give up on your life of faith. If you can't get it at all, if you simply are turned off by all the spiritualist talk, do some philosophy. There are many people who have come to faith through philosophy, but most importantly, take your spirituality seriously. Do not consider it a waste of time. So that's my closing advice, really. Take your faith seriously and take your spirituality seriously, and know the questions we are asking are important because they lead to the good life. And what else do we want in life? We want to live well. And to do that, we have to live in awareness of death.
Father Joachim Ostermann, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here. Until next time.
Father Joachim Ostermann.